I'm Pastor Aaron, and I have the privilege and the honor of being the pastor serving you as the pastor here at Central. I want to welcome you here. This is actually the second week of a season here at Central Lutheran that we call Advent. It's a season in which we anticipate the story of Jesus' birth, where we gather on the 24th here at Central. We're going to have like five different times that you can come and gather on Christmas Eve, Saturday, the 24th, and we hear the story of Emmanuel coming and being with us, God in flesh. So this is Advent. We started, actually the first week of Advent was Sunday. So this new series called Comfort and Joy actually began Sunday. And so I would encourage you to jump onto our YouTube channel, go back to our Facebook page, but check out last week's message, the first week of Advent. It ties in today as well. But it is Advent anticipation, and there's some anticipation. I am so excited. We have a huge announcement that we want to share with all of you. But we're going to do it next Wednesday. Anticipation. I want to build up the anticipation, so you all got to come back next week because we have a very special, big announcement that we want to share with all of you, and we cannot wait. We can't wait. I'm so excited here at Central. So here we go. This is week 2 of Advent, and the year is 2006, and there was this young lady by the name of Nicole, and she had plans. She had a huge plan, and her lifelong plan was to really to quit her job and to move down to Phoenix, Arizona. You see, 3 years earlier, she had graduated from college. She got a teaching job right out of college, and she was just kind of hanging out there teaching for 3 years. Life really wasn't going anywhere. She didn't have any big dreams of staying where she was. She had plans. She had a dream. She wanted to move. She was actually kind of bored. She was bored at where she was at. So she had this incredible job opportunity come up down in Phoenix. And to top it all off, she was able to move down to Phoenix. If she was able to move down to Phoenix, she could move in with her sister, which would have been awesome. And so she decided, I've got plans. I'm going to move down to Phoenix. And so she decided not to re-sign her teaching contract. And she was going to finish up the year and move down to Phoenix. And she was going to live happily ever after. Her plan was to be in Phoenix and eat sushi every single night for dinner. Her plan was to bask in the warm sun for 12 months out of the year. Her plan was to make this life-altering change and to move south. She was 23 years old, and she was single. This was every woman's dream. Well, the story goes like this. The first week in March, as she's wrapping up the year of school, the first week of March, there was a student teacher at the school that she was teaching at, and the student teacher came up to her and said, he approached her one day and said, hey, I have a friend. Actually, I have a best friend, and he's pretty cool. And this best friend, I think you two would hit it off. I would really like you two to go out on a date. He wanted to play matchmaker with this girl called Nicole. And so Nicole at the time, I don't know if she was pretty much open to anything. Maybe at this time she was desperate. So she's like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And so the student teacher asked her permission to give her phone number to his best friend. Now, his best friend said, hey, just so you know, my best friend that I'm hooking you up with, he's in the church business. He's a youth director, and I think he's going to be a pastor someday. So I hope that doesn't weird you out. She must have been really desperate, right? And so he gave his best friend her phone number. That best friend was me. It was me. Did anybody know that? Did you know where I was going with this? Oh, you already knew this. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the first Saturday in March, and it wasn't like your typical March. It was really warm. It was really warm out that day, and she brought her dog, and I brought my dog, and we met at the dog park in Eau Claire. It was awesome. And there at the dog park, when I saw her get out of her car, and I'm making eye contact with her right now, she was the most beautiful woman I have ever set my eyes on. Yeah, it was awesome. And from that day on, I would begin to mess up every one of her plans. I would mess up all of her plans to move where it was going to be warm, I messed up her plans to eat sushi with her sister in all these really bougie sushi restaurants down in Phoenix, Arizona. I messed up her plan to live in a beautiful house that had a hot tub and a pool. I messed up her plans where she was able to hike Camelback Mountain every single day for 12 months and this great job opportunity. I messed all those plans up because in 12 months from the time we met, we were engaged. And 6 months after we were engaged, we got married. And to this day, Nicole will tell you, because she tells me every day, that I messed up her plans. And she hasn't forgotten it. But here's the deal. When it comes to my wife, I was a disruption. I was a disruption in my wife's life, in her life, with all of her plans that she had. But the fact of the matter is, I was a disruption. Now, I was a disruption of probably love and hope and joy, but I was a disruption. But here's what I know. Here's what I know about disruptions in our lives. And many of you, you might be living in a disruption right now. Others of you might be coming out of a disruption right now. And for many of you, the disruption that might happen in your life is right around the corner. But here's what I know about disruptions. Disruptions change us. All of us. And over the past 2.5 years, we have experienced what will go down as one of the largest, greatest disruptions in the 21st century, as we have had to navigate this disruption called the pandemic. And I know some of you are like, I'm done with this, Pastor. Like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Like, Pastor, this is all you're talking about. You said enough about these last 2.5 years. I get it, but the truth is this. The past 2 years has been one huge disruption in all of our lives, like it or not. And unlike the disruption that I was for my wife, Nicole, that was filled with joy and it was filled with hope, this disruption has been really, really hard on all of us. The disruption has created layer upon layer upon layer of complications, and it's been really hard. And if we are honest with one another, regardless of how you feel about this last disruption, it has made us wanting a little comfort, and it made us wanting a little joy this Christmas. Kind of like comfort and joy, kind of like that Christmas story. That first Christmas night, when you think about the Christmas story, each of the characters in the Christmas story had their lives completely and utterly disrupted. Mary found out she was pregnant and she wasn't even married. Joseph found out that his fiancée was pregnant and he was not the father. You want to talk about a disruption. And at 9 months pregnant, they found out that they had to make this trek, this 9-day walking trek from Nazareth to a town called Bethlehem, all while Mary was 9 months pregnant. Talk about a disruption. Women, can I get an amen? And when they finally got there, the no vacancy light was on in the hotel, and so they had to go out into the barn. It was one disruption after another disruption after another one. And then there's the shepherds. Church, the shepherds. The shepherds are the most non-religious people in the Bible. They wanted nothing to do with this God that the temple was speaking about. And then there's the wise men. The wise men were also not religious, of all of them. And it was this miracle that these two groups of people, the shepherds and the wise men, even listened to the angels and did what the angels told them to do. It's a miracle. It was a huge disruption in all of their lives. And I imagine by the time they all got to the manger that Christmas, by the time the shepherds arrived and by the time the wise men arrived, they too were seeking some simple comfort and joy. That's it. And the season that we have been living through these last 2.5 years, it has made us yearn for a little comfort, and it's made us yearn for just a little joy. And I want to be honest with you today. This is going to be a little different of a message. This might come across as a counseling session between you and your pastor, because I need it. But as the pastor of this church, as the pastor of your church, as the pastor of God's church, these past 2 years have given me this ache in the pit of my stomach for normalcy. To go back to that normalcy that will bring me some comfort and bring me some joy. And that has been really, really, really hard on me personally. A couple months ago, I was hanging out having some coffee with some colleagues of mine. We were having some coffee and we were talking about the congregations and the churches that we serve. And one of my colleagues looked at me and asked me, he said, Aaron, have you ever considered being completely transparent with your congregation about how hard it's been these last 2.5 years? Have you ever thought about being completely transparent with how challenging it's been leading God's church over these past 2 years as we've had to navigate this disruption? And I'll be honest with you, the minute my colleague asked me that, the whole room, it got awkward. It got awkward because the colleagues of mine know my tendency as a Midwestern that's steeped in Midwest niceness to just bury my fatigue, to bury my weariness. To put on a front for all of you, to make it look like I got it together, like I can lead through this. I can do this. So what I want to do today is I want to speak from the heart. And I want to speak from the heart by answering this question. What's it been like leading a church through this disruption? What's it been like leading your church, God's church, through this disruption? And to answer that question, I want to give you an analogy. I love to ride bikes. Well, I used to love to ride bikes. I still love riding my bike. In fact, I used to love riding my bike so much that many probably would say that I had an unhealthy obsession with riding and racing my mountain bike. I loved it. And I imagine many of you in this room, you know how to ride a bike. And many of you who know how to ride a bike, you probably love getting out on your bike and enjoying a nice bike ride. Anybody in there, raise your hand if you love a nice bike ride. It's fun, right? Wow, we have a lot of curmudgeons in here. But what if I came to you and I were to say to you, show me how to ride this? Show me how to ride this. Now, after you stopped laughing at me, you would probably try to get on one of these, and you would probably fall over, and you'd probably get a bump or two. You might even get a bruise or two. Why? Because though a unicycle looks like a bicycle and acts like a bicycle, a unicycle is way different than a bicycle, isn't it? Right? I use this analogy because that's what it's been like leading a church through this disruption. It looks sort of like church, but to be honest, it's totally different. Totally different. You see, I've been in full-time ministry now. Full-time ministry since 2002. And since that year, this last year, not 2020, last year and this year has been the hardest year of ministries in my entire ministry career. I told you this is going to become a counseling session. This year has been emotional. There are times where I wonder, am I even doing the right thing? There are times where I've wondered, are we going in the right direction? Are we making the right decisions? Am I leading the right way? There has been times where I have been frustrated, and I've been frustrated to the point where I've become cynical, and I've had to check my cynicism at the door when I walk into work. There have been times where I've been sad. There have been times where I've grieved losses. Then there have been times, if I'm really, really honest with all of you, I've been really, really angry. Very angry. And I've had to have harder conversations this last year than I've ever had to have in my 20 years of full-time ministry. But the good news is this. You want some good news? Because I sound like a Debbie Downer right now, don't I? You want some good news? The good news is this. I love our church right now more than I've ever loved our church. In the 9 years that I've been here as your pastor, I love my church. I love you. And I love our mission more than I've ever loved it before. Yes, I have scars that I didn't have before COVID. Yes, I have bumps and I have bruises now before the pandemic, but the truth is, I love our mission and our church now more than ever. But I want to be honest with you. Our church, but not just our church, all of the churches. And this doesn't matter what denomination you are. This does not matter where you're located in the United States, where you're located in the world. All of the churches, all of God's church faces challenges as we begin to move forward, because living through disruptions, we know that disruptions change us. Disruptions change us. If you don't believe me, ask anybody who experienced the disruption called the Great Depression. In the 1930s, you had people saving duct tape, so if their shoe needed a repair, they had something to repair their shoes. That people would reuse their toothpicks. It was a disruption that changed their life. Because disruptions, what? They change us. Many of you in this room who lived through the 60s and Vietnam, that disruption changed how you viewed the world. It changed how you saw politics and government. It changed how you saw the wars, right? You know this. Disruptions change us. So, back to the Christmas story. Think about the shepherds. The shepherds were out in the fields. They're minding their own business. They're doing their work. They were just tending to their flock. They were just watching it all. They were the least religious type of people. In fact, here's a cool thing. The religious people, remember, shepherds were not the religious people looked at the shepherds, and they looked at them and they said, they are unfit. Those shepherds are unworthy. Their slogan, the religious people said, yes, come to our church. Everybody's welcome. Except for who? The shepherds. The shepherds were unfit to even come to church. They were never allowed to step foot in the temple. So those shepherds wanted nothing to do with that organized religion that followed God. But yet, still, the angels showed up, and the angels brought this message, and they said, we want you, yes, you, we want you, the shepherds to be the first to welcome the Savior into the world. It's a miracle, church, that the shepherds actually listened to the angels, and when they got there, their lives were totally disrupted and changed. And we know their lives were changed because the story doesn't say that the shepherds left and went back into the fields to hang out with the sheep. No, in Luke it tells us this. It says that when they saw this, they made known what had been told to them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. Rather than going back to the fields, rather than punching back into work, they were changed. And so they took their life story, they took their faith story to the streets, and they told them the Christmas story. The disruption changed the shepherds. And then it was the same for the wise men, people. The wise men were those people. They're from the east. They were astronomers and they were astrologers. They read horoscopes and the stars. And it's a miracle that the wise men too followed the star all the way to Bethlehem. But when they got there, the disruption changed their lives altogether. And instead of hightailing it back to the east and back to life as normal and back to gazing up to the stars, the story in Matthew goes like this. It says, when they left for their own country, they left by another road. Their lives were rerouted. The disruption changed them and changed their lives, because we all know together, church, disruptions change us. Disruptions change us. And the truth is this, disruption has changed all of us. And the church, you and I, were not immune to this. And here is the challenge that faces us as a church. I don't know if you know this, but when I look out there, when I lead this church, in churches, there are always two groups of people. Two groups of people in every church. And again, this is in every church, not just Central, not just in this particular denomination. It's in every church. There are two groups of people. The first group of people are the people who simply long for the things to get back to the way they what? Used to be. The first group of people, you will hear things like, church just doesn't feel the same way it used to be. I'll hear people in this group say, you know what, Pastor, I come to church. I come to my church. I come to the church I've been coming to for 50 years, and I look around and I don't recognize anyone anymore. They'll say, Pastor, my church just doesn't look the way it used to be. And in this group, there's this urge to bemoan the fact that so much has changed. Why can't we just go back to the way we used to be? Now, the second group that you find in churches is this. The second group is a group of people who absolutely loves change. They love change. And this group of people here at Central, they are people who prior to COVID were on the margins. They were on the margins for whatever reason because of all the change that has happened in their lives. And it's happened so rapidly. All of a sudden, for whatever reason, they feel connected to Central. They feel connected to the church. And there are people who watched us. The first time they watched us was online. The first time they hung out with us was online during the pandemic. And now they're here. They're physically present. And they are saying things like, I really don't care about the past because I wasn't here for the past. I'm just more excited to see what God has in store for our church moving forward. So here's what I want to do today. With the time that I have left, I want to address you. I want to address the two groups that are in this room and in this church. And I want to start by talking to those of you who dream and wish and long for things to go back to the way they used to be. And I want you to hear this. Listen to me loud and clear. Grieving the past is important. Hear me, please. Grieving the past is important. You need to know this. This is really, really important. I've done a lot of grieving this past year. And when we lose something, or even when we lose someone in our life, we grieve. And we grieve because it's a thing that we as humans need to do. That's how important grieving is. Grieving the past is important, but please listen to me right now. But living in the past is dangerous. Because living in the past, it traps us. A couple months ago, I got to go back. I got to go back to a church that I really started my ministry career at as a youth director. And I was able to go back to this church because it was a wedding for someone who happened to be in the confirmation program at the same time that I was the youth director at that church. And it's a great church. Please, don't go tell them this, but it's a great church. I love them. I love the people at the church. This church did a lot in my life, and a part of who I am today in front of you is because of this church. But here's what I noticed. As I walked around the church, and as I talked with the folks, and I talked with the staff, I realized something. When I picked up their monthly newsletter and their council minutes, I realized that everything in the church is the same as it was 15 years ago. The worship experience was the same. The staff was the same. The music was the same. They had the same programs that I led. They were still doing it. And as I read that monthly newsletter, it was the same monthly newsletter. And sure enough, as I read their council minutes, 90% of the people on their council were the same people on council 15 years ago when I was their youth director. Everything was the same except for the fact that they were worshiping only half the people compared to when we were there. And you know this, church. Living in the past can be dangerous. Living in the past can be dangerous. And if you still need proof, raise your hand if you remember those stores called Blockbuster Video. Raise them high, yes. I grieve today that our children will never know what it means to drive 20 minutes to a Blockbuster Video, to have your fingers crossed that they'll have the new release still on the shelf, right? I grieve that they'll never read a sign that says, please be kind and rewind, or that they'll have that VHS on the counter that's all melted saying, this is what happens when you leave your videotapes in your car. Remember that? I grieve that. Listen to this. Blockbuster Video, at its peak, had over 9,000 stores spread across the United States of America. Today, there is one, and it's in Oregon. And all it is a museum. Why? Because Blockbuster Video refused to believe that you and me would ever want to stream movies online. And in 2010, Blockbuster Video filed for bankruptcy. At the same time, what company was taking off? Netflix. How about this? How many of you in this room owned a Kodak or a Polaroid camera? Yeah, look at that. They were the cat's meow at the height of cameras. Remember that? Everybody in this room had one, a Kodak or a Polaroid. Well, Polaroid and Kodak, guess what? They no longer exist. And why do they no longer exist? Because they never believed that you and I would ever entertain photography, let alone digital photography, let alone photography taken by one of those little things we all carry called the cell phone in our pockets and in our purses. Here's my last one. This is a blast from the past. This used to be over by what's now Best Buy. How many of you remember the store called Toys R Us? You remember that? That was a field trip for my family. Man, early 90s, when we came down to Eau Claire, we had to stop at Toys R Us. My aunt, my godmother, was the manager at Toys R Us when it first opened up. It was awesome. Toys R Us no longer exists anywhere in the United States. Why? Because they refuse to believe that you and my wife and I would buy our children's Christmas presents online. You know this. Living in the past can be dangerous. And if we want to be a church that is relevant in our community today, we always have to be looking to the future. A church that recognizes that, hey, somebody in the past of this church looked to the future, and they looked to the future and said, I want you to grow up knowing the faith. I want you to grow up having a relationship with Jesus Christ. Someone in the past of this church thought about you in the future here. And knowing that, don't we as a church today want the same thing for the next generation? Don't we want to say, hey, whatever it takes as a church, we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that this place is filled with the next generation? See, grieving the past is important, but living in the past is dangerous. Now, that's the group that doesn't like change. Now I want to address all of you who love change. The other group of people who call Central Lutheran your church home and who love change. And to you, I have a really hard question for you. And the question I have for you is really more of a cryptic question. So bear with me really quick. This is for all of you who love change. The question is this: what's foundational and where do we need to change our approach? Let me say that again. To those of you who love change, what's foundational and where do we need to change our approach? So here we go. For all of you who love change, sometimes you change simply because you want to change something, right? The group I'm talking to, you sometimes change for no rhyme or reason. You just love change. And for those of you who don't love change, the people who love change, you people drive those people nuts. Because it's utter chaos. It's like, can't we just have something not change for a while? So for those of you who like change, we have to ask the question. And the question is, what's foundational? What's foundational to this church? Because here's what's happening in our culture today. Families are asking this question. Individuals are asking this question. We're all asking this question as families. What's foundational to our families? Because many of us, over the course of the last 2 years, we spent a lot of time together in quarantine. We spent a lot of time together because we were forced to spend time together because nothing else was open. And so families, as we come out of COVID, families are asking the question, is the rat race worth it? Families are asking this. Parents are going to their bosses, and parents are going and they're saying to their boss, I want to work more from home. And if the boss says, no, you can't, you got to come into your office, they'll say, fine, I'll just go find another job. Because we're done with the rat race. People living in the cities are tired of the rat race of city life, and the populations are blowing up in the burbs and blowing up in rural areas. What? Because what? What's foundational? Families are saying family is foundational. Their family is the most important. And so we have to ask that question as a church. What's foundational? What's foundational as a church? And the church needs to ask this over and over. And for us, our mission, the thing that gets you and I up in the morning to roll up our sleeves and to do God's work in our community is this. Our mission is to help people find and follow Jesus. That's our foundation. That's who we are. We believe that Jesus changes lives. We believe that Jesus transforms lives. We believe that our lives are better because of our relationship with Jesus, and we want everybody to experience the same thing. So if this is true, if our foundation is to help people find and follow Jesus, then moving forward, thinking about the future, as a church, we will care as much for those who aren't a part of our church as those of you who are. We're going to care just as much, if not more, for people who are not here right now than all of you. Now, I know that sounds pretty harsh. I still love you all, but you're not our mission. Nowhere in Scripture does Jesus, at the end of the Gospels, does he bring the disciples around and say, all right, I got 22 of you, we're good to go, we're done. No, Jesus says, I want you to go. And I want you to baptize all people. Don't stop with this small group. Go out. It's not for you, the disciples. It's for those who have yet to experience the love and purpose of Jesus Christ. So we are going to care as much for those who aren't a part of our church as those of you who are. And get this. I love this. Here's a quick story. Well before the pandemic even came, we, as a church, took it upon ourselves to adopt one of the local schools. We adopted Parkview Elementary right here in our community. I just burst right into the principal's office because she's a partner here, so I could do it. I just burst in there and I said, hey, we adopted you. If you need anything, just give me a call. We'll get it for you. It's awesome. And we love it. And this relationship has grown so much with the school. And over the years, we have flooded Parkview Elementary with resources for classrooms. We've provided numerous lunches for the entire staff throughout the year. One year, we gave each staff person at Parkview Elementary a $50 gift card to one of the local Micon cinemas so that they could just have a night out on us. 3 years ago, we bought every staff person in the Chippewa Falls School District a $5 gift card so they could go get coffee at one of the 2 local coffee shops, and it was on us. Why? Because we want the school, we want them to know that this church cares for them, sees them, and values what they do in our community. And you want to know what happened next? Our emails and our snail mailboxes were flooded with thank yous from the staff of Parkview Elementary. They were saying things like, we love your church. We love what your church is doing. People who don't even call this church their home would say, we can't believe what you did for us. Thank you. We can't believe this. We are so grateful to you. And just last April, do I even need to say it? Just last April, with the tragedy around Parkview's with one of Parkview's very own students, we hosted right here, right where you're seated, we hosted a healing service. And there were two rows of Parkview staff people who don't call Central their home, but they were here. And it was full of them because they needed to grieve and they needed a place to let their sorrow flow. You see, we want to be a church who will care as much for those who are not a part of our church as those who are. We want to be in this community to say, so that this community says, if Central Lutheran no longer exists, wow, we're sure going to miss them. They can't. So given all that, I want to share with you really quickly 4 things. I promise you, I promise. In the next 5 minutes, promise. I want to share with you the approach that I think we need to change moving into the new year here at Central Lutheran. And I want to share with you what I believe. This is my personal belief. The staff has never heard this. The staff and I never talked about this. The council has never heard about this. This is not something the council came up with. This is what I believe. This is the things that keep me up at night that I think about. If our foundation is to help people find and follow Jesus, and if we're going to care as much for those who are not here tonight as those of you who are here tonight, here's what we need to think about. We need to think meaning over more. We need to think meaning over more. And here's what I think everybody recognized during the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we are all just blasted busy. People have more and more to do. We have enough to do as families. And we as a church, we don't want to simply fill people's calendars with more things to do. Instead, we want to fill people's lives with meaning. And that meaning comes from Jesus Christ. Because Jesus is the one who brings our lives meaning. It's why I'm asking you at the end of my messages, I'm asking you specific questions during my messages. It's why Sarah, who's our director of small group ministry, it's why she's asked me every week to put out a small group ministry guide that will talk about the messages. It's why our kids and student ministries are talking about these messages, is because we want to help people to talk about it so that when you leave this place, you can't help but to talk about it. That's all you want to do. We want to be thinking more about meaning over more. The second thing I believe that we need to be a church is I think we need to focus more on connection over content. Connection over content. There's a lady, she's no longer with us anymore, but she was in assisted living at Manor. And her visitation partner, every single week, would bring her, we have Kindles, and we'd upload all of my messages on the Kindle. And she taught her how to use this Kindle and how to watch my messages. And she would sit there, church. This 92-year-old woman would sit there and binge watch my messages. She would come on a Monday with 6 new messages uploaded on this Kindle, and she would watch all 6 in one day. And guess what she would do the next day? She would watch them all over again until she got a new Kindle, right? And she would keep rewatching and binge watching. Listen, you and I, we can watch any sermon anytime that we want now. You can watch any pastor in this country. You can worship online with any church. And I bet most of the sermons are way better than any sermon I will ever preach. You can access devotionals and daily scripture readings on apps and on websites and have them pop up on your phone before you even wake up in the morning. People don't come to church. Listen to me. People don't come to church for a sermon. They come to this place to get connected. You're here to be connected. You come to get your children connected with other children who share the same values and morals. People come to Central so that they can sit in a worship and experience where they have an experience where they realize that this something is so much bigger than themselves. They come so that they can wonder about life and faith and do life with people. They come to feel a connection with the music that is being played in the space. People come so that they can find other followers of Jesus Christ to do life with, to find meaning together and purpose together, all around Jesus Christ. So moving forward, I think we need to emphasize connection over content. And third, as a community, we need to emphasize more that we need to be for our community over in our community. Let me explain this really quick. We don't want to be a church that's simply known as the church kitty corner to the post office in the Mexican restaurant. That's not the church I want to be known for. Here in Chippewa, your church, we are constantly being invited to sit around the table of stakeholders of Chippewa County and to talk about the real issues that our community is facing. Did you know, in this community, homelessness is right on the rise right now. Homelessness is. In fact, here in Chippewa County, it is 6 times higher today than it was just 12 months ago. Shouldn't we as a church be more concerned about the issues that people are facing in our community than anyone else? Shouldn't that be us? Here in Chippewa County, the yearly suicide rate of teenagers and adult males far exceeds the national average throughout the U.S. Shouldn't we as a church be more concerned about the issues that people are facing in our community than anyone else? I mean, shouldn't that be us? Here in Chippewa, we've been struggling. We've been struggling with our own pandemic for the past 10 years, and it's called methamphetamine. And it's a drug in our community that has no socioeconomic boundaries or demographic boundaries. It's a pandemic that has been ravaging our community, and it's tearing our families apart, and it's costing us this community. Shouldn't we, as a church, be more concerned about the issues that people are facing in our community than anyone else? Shouldn't that be us? We want to be known for what we're known for in this community, what we are for in this community, rather than just in our community. And I told you, lastly, and this is a big one. If you've been around here and you've listened to my message the last 6 weeks, you've heard me say this over and over and over again. As we move into the future, I think we as a church need to emphasize being real over being right. Maybe you grew up in a church like I grew up in. A church that was more about being right. It believed that the people who gathered on Sunday mornings did things right. They believed that their style of music was right. They believed that their worship was right. They believed that their theology was the right theology and that church down the street was the wrong church. They did things right. People, the folks in our community are not looking for a church that is right. They're looking for a church that is filled with people who just want to be real. They're looking for a church where people are real, where they're authentic, where they can share in the joys, they can share in the challenges of life, and simply be themselves. So when I think about this list right here, isn't that what each and every one of us wants? When we think about a church we want to be a part of, isn't that us? So as we think about the Christmas season that is upon us, we have lived through the biggest disruption of our lives. And as I think about that Christmas story, it was a huge disruption for Mary, and for Joseph, for the shepherds, and for those wise men. But here's the best part. In the midst of that disruption that they experienced, in the midst of that disruption, what did they find? They found a baby who is the Messiah. They found the God who is Emmanuel, wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. In the midst of all of their disruptions, they found Jesus. And I wonder if God authored this Christmas story in such a way so that people like you and people like me, in the midst of whatever disruption we are experiencing, that we will find the very same thing, the God that is right there. So when the boss comes to you and says, hey, here's a box because next week's is your last week, you'll know that in the disruption, God is there. This next year, when you get the call from the doctor and the doctor tells you it's cancer, in the midst of the disruption, you will know that God is there. When the spouse looks at you and says, I can't do this anymore. In the midst of the disruption, God is right there. When you sit on the edge of your bed of that loved one who's about to take their last breath, in the midst of the disruption, God is right there. When Christmas rolls around and there is more month left, there's more days in the month left than money in the checking account, you will know that God is there. When you're pulling your hair out and you can't think about doing this parenting stuff much longer, you will know in the disruption that God is right there. And maybe, just as it was in the Christmas story, as their lives were disrupted and they were sent in a different course, maybe this God of ours is disrupting this church in our lives and sending us. This God promises that in the midst of the disruption, He is there. He is our Emmanuel. And for that, all of God's children said, Amen. For old lang syne